Hi everyone. I saw this hashtag recently and I'm fascinated by it because I find that this is an area of challenge that I also face, and that is not my aesthetic. So looking at and working with decks that are definitely not our aesthetic, I think is such a fascinating way to stretch. For me, it's been a fascinating way to really stretch my understanding of the tarot and my interest in it and everything. I really, yeah, I love that. Or of, Oracle, all of these things, all of the things. So the first deck that I would say I have been challenged by because it's not my aesthetic, and yet I completely love the deck. So I'm going to say I've included decks that I really love, or decks that I really appreciate and respect, and which really changed my perspective about the tarot. So the first one is the tree. Oh crap! Off to a booming start. The Tree Spirit Oracle. That's it. The Tree Spirit Oracle by Simon H. Lilly. You can get them on Etsy. They're pretty, right? But I appreciate them deeply now. When I first got this deck, it was not because of the aesthetic. It was because of the feel and the knowledge and the wisdom. Over time, the bright colors, the use of these kind of unusual glyphs that have no distinct set style. The style changes, it seems, like from glyph to glyph. That is something that has now become, the sort of sigils and glyphs and so forth, and the use of the color with them has really started to become more of my aesthetic over time as a result. So, this was definitely not my reading aesthetic. It's not the way that I tend to get information. You really have to kind of learn the names of the trees because they're not directly on here, just the number is. You have to really either have the guidebook or use them very, very specifically and carefully over time. But the readings that I get are spot on, dead accurate, and remarkable. And the deck itself and the knowledge and wisdom applied to it completely transcends the aesthetic. Deck number 2, I purchased because it was not my aesthetic. And yet when I watched a fellow YouTuber walk through it, I was so overcome by what it shook up in me and how it challenged me that I decided to go ahead and get it anyway. And it's one of the more popular videos on my entire channel, the Apparition Spirit Speak Tarot Deck, by Mary Elizabeth Evans, who I adore. Her work I adore. This is like little light blue and pink angels floating. That's just not my aesthetic, okay? This crazy marker drawings that are so minimalistic and kind of modern and primitive in some respects, looks like doodles from someone's book. It really not my aesthetic. I can be a real I can be an art snob sometimes, and I'm aware of that. It's not what I want to do. I don't intend to be an art snob. I've spent a lot of time in museums and studying art. And something I've done over the last several years before I came back to tarot with this level of intensity is appreciating more like folk art and primitive art and the simplicity of doodles and mark making and so forth. And when I came to this particular deck from that perspective and from a more who is the person creating this? What is the effect that's created? What's the depth of insight? It completely transformed the way I saw the deck. So suddenly I found that I was looking at a deck that made perfect sense, that offered some new insights and ideas and ways of viewing the tarot, as well as a different aesthetic. And so I ended up falling in love with it, and in falling in love with all of her decks and all of her work. And at my first year anniversary of the channel, I did a giveaway and made a great, probably I regret it a little bit. I don't regret having done the giveaway. I regret not having these particular decks anymore because I now see that I would be using them if I had them. But I gave away my Vessels deck and my Iris deck, and I will probably at some point replace them. This is the other deck that I have that she did, the Spirit Speak, the original one. It's a very much smaller deck. Again, it's just black and white, looks like doodles. But once I had the Spirit Speak, or rather the Apparition deck, I really wanted to go back and look at her Spirit Speak deck. And I'm so glad I did. This has been one of my more popular decks that I use. I had to put them both away for a while, in fact, because I found that I was using them to the exclusion of a lot of other decks that I could have been working with. And they're not the Marielle. Let's be real. They're wonderful, but they're not the Marielle. So I thought, well, if I've got to have like one or two decks that, you know, I'm always using, these are good. But I knew that I would always want to have the Marielle. Anyway, it's a totally different discussion. The next one I'm going to do because it's a quick one, or quicker. It came in this bag, and it's definitely not my aesthetic, but because I love, again, because I fell in love with the Apparition deck, I knew that I would probably be able to fall in love with this deck as well and get past or get beyond, you know, the like, not my aesthetic part of it. So it is the Tarot of the Crone. It's a deck I've wanted for a very long time because I knew that going in, I wanted what I wanted from the deck was way beyond its aesthetic, right? Way beyond the aesthetic, which is, again, simple, a little bit primitive. It's, you know, it is not a complicated, artistically complicated deck. And yet the depth, you know, that someone's ability and talent with art and graphic design, it does not mean that they're going to be effective at communicating spiritual depth, wisdom, experience, and information. It just doesn't. So this is another artist and creator whose perspective and view on that level for me completely supersedes the aesthetic of their artwork. Like, that just is not, I do like that it's creepy, actually. That kind of makes me happy. But, you know, it's just not what I would necessarily be attracted to. And yet, what I find now is that through having developed such a deep appreciation for Tarot of the Crone and for the work of Mary Elizabeth Evans, my entire sense of what I think of as my aesthetic or not my aesthetic has shifted in a completely different direction. And so you will notice, like, how could she say that? These are decks she loves. Yeah. I mean, these are like some of the favorite, you've just seen like some of the favorite decks of my entire collection, and working decks. And so, yeah, that's huge. And sometimes, you know, when you're just looking at things from a completely open mind space, instead of from an aesthetic, you know, an aesthetically pleasing space, yeah, it just changes everything. It changes everything. Deck 3, and is that right? No, 4. There are 3 decks that fall into category number 4 because they're all by the same creator. But I will go first with the deck that I love the most. Again, because of its uniqueness and the depth with which I understand it and work with it, and that is the Buddha Tarot by Robert M. Place. So this is one of the original printings of this deck. It's an OOP version. There's a new one by Schiffer that I don't have yet. And this aesthetic for me is really blah. I looked at this one so many times in people's walkthroughs and just thought, I have no God, that's such a dry, boring, straightforward color in the lines take on this entire concept. I don't know that I would really want to work with it or shell out the money. Because there's also there are ways in which he deviates from traditional Tibetan symbolism and stuff elements and assignments and so on, that really is hard for me to initially was hard for me to be with, because I was still learning so much about the Tibetan system and how that functions. And at a certain point, I overcame that and realized I actually really have to have this deck and work with it. And it has been one of my favorites to work with. I love it. It's one of my favorite decks ever, ever, ever in the world. And again, this one's more in line with my aesthetic. Again, like a very Tibetan-y looking skeleton. But I think it's the line work. And the kind of, it's so clean and tidy and perfect in a way that it feels a little bit to me like with the black lines, like a coloring book. And I have a lot of negative associations with coloring books as a child. It was like, why are you giving me a coloring book? Why don't we have like lots of papers and scissors and markers and crayons, and why do I have to just color inside? I don't want to color inside the lines. To me, that's a torture. I find that torturous to color inside the lines. I know that people love that. I know they do. But even when I started doing embroidery, I was like, oh God, please don't make me use a pattern. And quilting, I can't. It just makes me crazy. There's just so much in society, I think, that hems us in and puts us in a box and makes us color inside the lines that I get to a point with it where I can't. But I love the deck. And again, I knew, because Robert emplaces like knowledge base and what brought him to the tarot in the first place is so, I don't want to hit that, is so deep, has such a level of depth that I ended up also then wanting to understand it better, and got these two decks of his as well, which I have not spent time working with over the depth year the way I had intended. That's okay. That's why, there's no limit to these things. Again, these I like a little bit more than, in some ways, aesthetically, right? They take a little bit of a deviation away from being quite so simplistic. There's a little bit more depth to it. It's still very like Eurocentric. It's still coloring inside the lines. The aesthetic is still very classical. There's a little bit of the woodcut aesthetic in here, which I like from time to time. But there's something about it that just irritates me, and I don't know what it is. I don't know how to specify it. It's just so incredibly Eurocentric and white, and almost cartoony. And yet I also love it and appreciate it. And I will say that my partner, whose degree, his undergraduate degree was a BFA, so Bachelor of Fine Arts in drawing, has said many times over that this is an exceptionally well done piece of work. He's like, that is a really beautiful deck. He likes the way the coloring goes. And he's also not a color inside the lines person. So, I can see that it has all of those qualities to it that like tick the boxes for art. And that's probably because it doesn't challenge or push it in any way. That kind of is part of why I don't warm to it right away. And yet I still really, really like it. The alchemical tarot is a little different, but again, you can tell that you're definitely working with the same, here's the backings, working with the same artist. Again, it's still very Eurocentric in terms of aesthetic and, classical. There's a little hint of woodcut in here, of that, or lino cut. And that sort of aesthetic, as well as like line work, and it's combining a number of different techniques and perspectives artistically. And it's much more complex and sort of nuanced than what we get with the Buddha Tarot, right? And so I can also appreciate it for that purpose. But what I want from, this deck, for example, in that Five of Swords is the kind, that's what I'm looking for. Is being tempered, being challenged, being pushed, having my viewpoints and perspectives and ideas about things beaten out of me to some extent so that I can just see what's there. And when I do just see what's there, the aesthetic of this deck I stop seeing the aesthetic and I stop judging. I stop looking at it from an artistic viewpoint and I start just engaging with what's there. What's here? And when I do that, I'm blown away by how beautiful it is, by how much skill is required to create it, right? There's so much skill involved in this and in the creation of these images, not just artistically, but also, esoterically, spiritually. There's so much to it that really it takes on, the artwork itself takes on a whole new level of meaning. It's remarkable. So I've actually come to really love the aesthetic of his decks and his style now that I've had a chance to really sit with them and with his work, his intellect, his skill, recognizing how poor my mark making skills are with pen and ink. It's, really, really poor, really primitive, beyond primitive. It's humbling and beautiful. And suddenly it's like, wow, why would I have ever worried about the aesthetic in here in the first place, right? The next one and final one, I think may also surprise folks, because again, we're talking about one of my favorite decks that has had a tremendous influence on my work and on my own understanding of tarot. And that is the Spirit Keepers Tarot. Okay, so I kind of liked the black and white simplicity of the line work and so forth that one could find in the original SKT. When we get to the Vitruvian edition, I felt honestly, and I don't so much anymore, but honestly, I started to look at them and I felt like they were just really, I don't know, way too cluttered and way too, there's just too much. There's too much. I liked the idea of the sepia tone being in there. Let's see, I've got these arranged in a particular order for certain reason. So I'm just going to be careful about how I pull these back out. Yeah, I wasn't sure about it. I think the line work is fine. But again, it felt very much like, I don't know, just, it was too busy and yet really simple, right? But it was okay. I was like, it's okay enough. I can get past that enough to just get into the cards, into the work. And again, the more time I've spent with it, the more I'm like, I really love it. I love the line work. I love the way that, I just love it. I really do. I really love the deck. And then just following her process of learning to draw and do a better job with her artwork, which, I love that Benebell is so open about that and very straightforward about how that, impacts her work. Or has impacted her work. I then was very excited to see what choices she would finally make with the Revelation edition, and it feels to me honestly a little bit still like Robert M. Place's work, right? Where I'm just not sure. Oh, I got my certificate of authenticity back here. Yeah, where I'm just not entirely sure, but there's more space to see the cards themselves with the use of color. There's more depth. You know, there's a lot more here kind of to be with and work with. But then what I feel like I'm missing here is the line work, right? This one feels more, you know, the images feel more manipulated and less homemade, right? Less like a homemade gift. So I don't know. God, it smells good. Anyway, that's my little take on aesthetic. And my big lesson, I think, in all of it, and learning about it, is that sometimes my aesthetic leads me astray. It has a time or two led me towards decks where I'm like, oh, that's really pretty, but I don't know. Not sure that it really reads very well. I was worried that that might be the case, in fact, with the Yokai Yoshi Tarot, which is quickly becoming one of my new favorites. I can't tell you why. I just am in love with it. But I love the aesthetic of Japanese artwork. Oh, it smells so good. And I really worried that because I was so in love with the aesthetic of this deck, that I would, you know, it would end up being basically a really pretty deck that I can't read with. So that was my fear when I first opened it and looked at it. It's so perfectly turned out. It's so beautifully pulled together. It's just exquisitely well done, and totally my aesthetic. It's not, you know, it has a lot of, the line work has a lot of movement to it. It's not perfect. It's not always symmetrical. It's fluid. It's flowing. That is something I love about brushwork in particular. Look at that fool. And I do like negative space and simplicity. I know that this is probably confusing for some people. It's like, what's the difference between what we're looking at there and what we're looking at in some of the other work? Like, it's either too loose or it's too tight or it's too, you know, I don't know. I can't tell you always necessarily, but I can tell you that I either warm to the aesthetic of a deck or I look at it and go, oh, what am I looking at here? And this is one of the ones where I was like, oh my God, I love that so much. The good news is that it delivers on its promise. So it is not a deck where I was in love with the aesthetic, but I don't really feel like it works. You know, I do like simple line work. I really do. Very, very simple. People, I mean, the thing is too, when you look at Japanese line work like this, it looks as though, you know, it's so loose that it shouldn't be that hard to do. It is so difficult to learn how to do this type of mark making. It takes a huge amount of practice and skill. It is not straightforward. But yeah, suffice it to say, when you think you know something about art, it can really unhelpfully influence the way that you look at things. And in terms of aesthetic, I think what I have learned, certainly throughout my life, but definitely on this journey here, is to let go of aesthetic to the greatest extent possible, simply to be able to engage with what's actually there, with what the intention was to begin with, and in order to, you know, to learn something, you know, to gain something new, whether it's just simply understanding another human being and the way that they've chosen to express themselves, or whether it's to challenge myself to learn and understand something new, or just to be able to really appreciate and engage with that person's work and with the knowledge and intelligence and wisdom that they have to share. So that's my whole doodah with aesthetic. So I love this hashtag. I'm enjoying watching other people's videos. I know I'm late to the game on this one, but I've really, really enjoyed it. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, folks. Thank you again. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye. Okay, another little surprise ending here, everybody. Hello. Another deck that I completely forgot, and I didn't realize it until I was getting ready to edit and upload. And I found my notes, and this is one that I really, really wanted to mention. So if you're not recognizing it already, it's the Santa Muerte Tarot. Yeah. This is not my aesthetic. To to say the very least. I mean, when you flip through the cards, they are something about the coloration. It's like oversaturated but dark, right? So they're kind of darkened, like even a bright day in a desert is like through a filter. This is just, I don't know. It's like overly graphically designed. They're busy. They're, in some ways, like the imagery to me is like overworked. I tend not, it is also like, let's see here. Oh, it's not so much that one. Yeah, here we go. There's all these female skeletons, but they have boobs and waists, There's a lot of use of guns in here. Like that's kind of violent looking. Where's a good one that has guns in it? Actually, that one's marvelous. Here we go. That Two of Wands as the two guns. I don't know. I don't like guns. I'm not a gun person. I think that's probably not going to be a surprise to anybody here. Just not into guns at all. That is outrageously busy to me. I get that it's an MC Escher kind of feel to it. It makes total sense to me as a card. Now, this is one of my favorite decks. Okay, so anybody who knows me really well, and clients who do, know that this is easily one of my favorite decks. I absolutely love it. And I had to really look past the aesthetic of this deck so that I could work with it and appreciate it. And I actually do deeply. I get that it is on some levels cultural appropriation because the deck artist whose name totally escapes me, Fabio Listrani, is Italian and not Mexican. Right? He's not an actual Mexican artist. And I feel at the same time like he captures like landscape, and it's like it feels to me like he spent some time in Mexico. I've heard plenty like from Mexicans about their feelings about this deck that range from I absolutely love it, it captures something from my culture and I adore it, all the way through to I hate it, it makes me so angry I could scream. So, it's, there's never a straightforward answer to any of these things, right? We're always doing our best to kind of learn and listen. That said, when just coming back to the basics here, like the stormy skies and the way those are portrayed, I don't know. Something about this is just not my aesthetic. And I completely love it. I've looked for another Dia de los Muertos deck that really feels to me like it has this feel, but maybe a different aesthetic. I've never found one yet. Like I've looked through them online and stuff, and none of them compare. So this one stays with me, and I still continue to enjoy it and use it mostly around, the Halloweeny. It feels like more like late August, September, early October to me. Probably because of the landscape and the plants and stuff are what I see around me at that time of year. Wow, I wonder what I did with that guidebook. Oh, it's right here. I was worried that it had just gone missing because the deck was out for, well, probably 8 weeks while I was using it and working with it. But it's just not my thing. It's not my aesthetic, really. But I love it. The other thing is, and I don't have a copy of it. I thought about getting a copy of it this year, which is the Oracle deck that he developed that goes with this deck. I really have wanted to work with that one. I was going to get it this year. October took off and just ran away. It just ran away from me. And I thought, it's not a big deal. It's published. It's mass market. It'll be here next year. But again, that one, the reason I didn't get it sooner, not my aesthetic, right? And yet I completely adore the artist, or I adore the decks. The decks are accurate. They have their own voice. It is a unique, it's unique in many respects. But I'm not crazy about the artwork. I just have never been crazy about the artwork. And I work with the deck anyway because it's really, really good. So there we go. All right, folks, I think that's the last one that I'll add here to this because I'm pretty sure I've covered all of the decks that lie outside of my aesthetic that I own, at least right now. But anyway, there we go. Bye!